Welcome everyone. Today we look at the interaction among multiple institutions and regimes. No international environmental treaty or regime operates in isolation. The problems, but also the solutions, often are affected by and relate to other treaties and regimes. Individual institutions and regimes thus influence each other's effectiveness. Let's look at regime complexes. I hope you still remember that a regime is a system of principles, norms, rules, operating procedures, and institutions that actors create to regulate and coordinate action in a particular issue area. Regime complexes, then, are a loosely coupled set of specific regimes. Individual regimes are connected through specific links or interactions, but there's no structure that coordinates these connections, and there's no hierarchy among the regimes. Here you can see the example of the climate regime complex. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is central. Please note that this is taken from a publication that dates before the adoption of the Paris Agreement. International climate decision-making is informed by the scientific assessment reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which synthesizes climate science. Development cooperation can help countries to invest in a low-carbon transition and to adapt to climate change. The Montreal Protocol regulates ozone-depleting substances that also affect climate change. These are just a few examples of the interaction within the climate regime complex. I'm sure that you can find more institutions that belong to the complex and more interactions among them. Let's now zoom into the interaction between two institutions. This is basically picking one of the connections that bind the regime complex together. Interaction means that one institution's activities or rules affect the operation of another institution. While interaction, strictly speaking, suggests a mutual influence, this can also happen in one direction only. The impact that one institution has on another is not necessarily supporting the same objective. Interaction can be mutually supportive, but one institution's action can also undermine another institution's activities. We can differentiate synergetic, cooperative, and conflictive interaction. Synergetic interaction occurs when two institutions pursue the goals and norms that are very similar and synergetic. Cooperative interaction occurs in situations in which a number of institutions are loosely integrated with a core institution. Conflictive interaction occurs when largely unrelated institutions pursue conflictive objectives and goals. If we break the mechanism of an interaction down into individual steps, it could look like this. At the macro level, we have one institution, like the climate regime, which sets rules and norms. This in turn affects individual actors that are involved in that institution, like government officials who negotiate on their country's behalf or who are in charge of implementing international rules at the national level. Those actors either also are involved in another institution, like the biodiversity regime, for example, or they have networks with actors who are involved in, for example, the biodiversity regime. Through this, they can influence the perceptions, preferences, and behavior of those actors. When those actors then interact in the, let's say, biodiversity regime, they can insert perspectives and norms that are inspired by the climate regime in this biodiversity regime, for example. This could be a very simple model of how interaction concretely could unfold. Interaction often is transmitted through individuals at the micro level, as we just saw. But this is not always the case. There can also be a direct effect of reducing an ozone-depleting substance on climate change, since it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. For this reason, differentiating interaction at levels of output, outcome, and impact is helpful. I hope you still remember those terms from the discussion of regime effectiveness. At the output level, the provisions of one treaty could directly affect the provisions of another treaty by supporting them or by contradicting them. At the outcome level, behavior that results from one regime can directly affect behavior that supports or counteracts behavior in another regime. At the impact level, changes that solve one problem can either also solve another or create or worsen another problem. Of course, one stage of one regime can also influence other stages of another regime. This creates quite a messy picture. And here we're still looking at unidirectional interaction. This very much links to complexity. Global environmental governance is quite complex, with multiple structural, political, economic, behavioral, and other factors that interact. When we look at a simple system, it is characterized by linear causality. One factor always causes the same effect. For this reason, it is predictable and can be modeled. It is a closed system that is not influenced from the outside and, for this reason, can externally be controlled. A complex system, on the contrary, is characterized by interactions, multiple causalities, and equifinality. For this reason, it is unpredictable and cannot be modeled. A complex system is open to influence from the outside and is constantly influenced by external factors. Most systems probably are somewhere between those two ideal types, but global environmental governance certainly has a number of complex features. Individual institutions and regimes do thus mutually interact and influence each other's effectiveness. This interaction can be mutually supportive, but also countervailing. Managing the complexity is quite a challenge.